Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Fantasaster. This is Battlefield 1. In today's update video, we'll be talking about the North Sea update, or Part 2 to the Turning Tides DLC update. Accompanying, of course, this update, the long-awaited Time to Kill shift. We're going to be talking about not only what's been added to the game, given, of course, that is a relatively short list. More importantly, of course, we're going to be talking about what's been changed specifically regarding gunplay, regarding gun balance, so that you guys know exactly what's going on, what to expect, and that you're not surprised when suddenly some weapon that you didn't think was able to hose you down quite that quickly suddenly manages to do so. Starting off then with the three new things that we have, given that is part 2 of a DLC, there's not much here. We've got 2 new maps, one very vehicle focused, of course Heligoland, and one slightly more infantry focused. Nevertheless, there's a couple of vehicles to be found here, including of course a destroyer and of course some attack boats. That is of course Zeebrugge. The new vehicle is the C-class airship, a slightly smaller player controlled airship. You've all seen plenty of footage over previous months, previous weeks from CTE on various YouTube channels, so no surprise here exactly what's coming regarding new content. When it comes into the weapon balance, the main focus, the main topic of today's video, there's a simple and slightly more complex way of looking at it. The simple way is essentially weapons have become, or weapon classes have become better or equally good at what they previously already were. So essentially the LMG is now better at being an LMG, and a assault SMG is better at being an assault SMG than it previously was. What this means in practice is that, for example, the support and the assault automatic weapons have seen a reduction in their required bullets to kill in close quarters. This is generally within 12 meters, from 5 down to 4, giving them of course much better performance in those ranges, as well as at longer ranges, especially the LMGs, but also the SMGs of lesser relevance there, admittedly though, have seen a reduction in the number of bullets needed to effectively down their target. This means, of course, that generally you're gonna die faster, at least in close quarter and at more medium-long range, at that range where LMGs are effective. Between that is to say at medium range, nothing really has changed. And this is where the medic class, of course, is supposed to excel. And they have also seen a buff, while slightly different to that seen by the SMGs and, of course, LMGs of the support and assault class, respectively. Instead of getting a raw damage output buff, these weapons have generally seen improvements in their reliability, if you so will. So the medic class generally is now more accurate with its SLRs and gains spread less quickly, as well as performing its minimum bullet to kill for a longer distance than previous, at least with a number of the SLRs. In other words, if you're previously able to 3-shot kill your targets with something like the Farquhar Hill Storm to around about something like 40 meters, you're now able to do that for 5 to 10 meters further before you slip up to a 4-shot kill. This means, of course, that the assault weapons and the LMGs have seen a buff versus the medics in close quarters, but essentially a nerf against the medics at medium range. The scout class, generally speaking, remains relatively unchanged. The only last thing that we do have to mention here when it comes to the simple layout of the time to kill changes is that LMGs have a slower time to ADS to compensate for their higher damage in close quarters, meaning they're very much not a run and gun style weapon to be used, more of a more methodical, thoughtful weapon. Once you're set up, you're going to rip through everything, but if you're not set up, you get surprised by a quirky, quick assault player, then likely you're going to be at a disadvantage. Also to note, while the shotguns didn't see a change generally in the damage output, they did see a change in the way they function. So because of their spread model now being essentially far more reliable, the individual pellet placement being far more even and far less random than previous, you will find that these weapons will be more consistent in the amount of damage they deal at any given range, meaning of course they have a more consistent one-shot kill in close quarter combat. Now I'd love to go into a huge amount of detail regarding the time to kill patch, talk about every single individual weapon. However, for 2 reasons, this isn't quite possible in today's video. The first is time, that's the obvious one. The second is we haven't actually got all of the details I think we should be getting from DICE at this point. Their patch notes leave out some stuff that they mentioned on the CTE, on the basically final version of this patch being tested, and then again there's other things that they mentioned or that people have noticed in game that haven't actually been mentioned in patch notes. So really it's a little bit of a mess at this point, but I'm going to point out some of the important things that we do know for certain, or I have observed myself in game. Over time, I guess the full extent of changes to hit every single individual weapon will become apparent, especially of course once Synthic updates its weapon stats and we know exactly how much damage at what range with what recoil every single weapon does. Starting then with the assault class, however. In case you were wondering, the Automatico did not get a reduction in its close quarter bullets to kill from 5 to 4. Thank God, because that would be absolutely insane. Thus, the Automatico has relatively seen a nerf to something like the Hellriegel, the MP18, or the Riberol. It is, however, still the king of close quarter combat when it comes to the SMGs, leaving out the Maschinenpistole, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Further to that, the Trench Carbine has seen a reduction in 12 meters from its bullets to kill down to 3, meaning that weapon is now essentially what the autoloading 825 is. Still not great for close quarters when you're going up against a weapon, for example, like the Hellriegel, which is shooting almost double your fire rate and only requires 1 bullet more to down your target. But hey, I guess if you were a fan of that weapon previously, at least it's just as bad or relatively good, depending on your point of view, as it previously was. The Maschinenpistole has seen some more interesting changes. It has seen a reduction in the number of bullets to kill down from 5 to 4, but it's also seen a reduction in its fire rate from previously, of course, 1,200 down to 900, meaning that effectively it does actually get a slight damage nerf. It's also seen some changes to the way its spread model works, its recoil model works. We haven't gotten all the details on that just yet, but essentially if you were a big fan of that weapon, and I was one of those people who was a big fan of that weapon, you're gonna have to deal with the fact that the weapon no longer is really as good as it once was. Moving on to the medic class, here, as said, a lot of details are still missing. I, for my part, thought, for example, that the autoloading 835 was going to get an extension to its 3-shot kill range. No mention of that in the patch notes, so at this point, I'm not actually sure if it has. What I do know, however, is that weapons such as the Farquharil, the M1907, the Rigotti, and the Fedorov Automat have seen an effective range increase. So the distance at which they can down a target with the minimum number of bullets they possibly can down a target has been increased. Now, for some weapons like the Fedorov Automat and, for example, the Rigotti, this is going to make a difference in combat on the battlefield. For weapons like the M1907, on the other hand, in my opinion, there's not much helping anymore, because these weapons still perform exactly the same in those close quarter scenarios they, in my opinion, essentially were designed for. I thought the autoloading 825 and the 1907 really were the medic's close quarter weapon to be on the front lines. If you're playing medic, you can't really do that anymore with those weapons, because you are now seriously outgunned by pretty much anything the assault or the support class can field on the battlefield. Moving on to the RSC for the medic class, this weapon is actually interesting because this is the only SLR, at least as far as I know, that's seen an actual increase to its fire rate. It's gone up from 163 rounds per minute to 179.9, or effectively 180 rounds per minute, making this a more viable weapon, actually meaning that this weapon now out-damages, I believe at least, the autoloading 835, or definitely going to be a lot closer than it previously was. Further to that, it's seen a horizontal and vertical recoil decrease, so if you were a fan of the RSC previously, you are going to absolutely love this update because it's just buffed this weapon quite significant. Regarding the Scout, I said there was no major things to be mentioned. The one thing that we can mention, however, is the 1903. Just like the Trench Carbine, it's seen a reduction in the required bullets to kill in close quarters up to 12 meters to 3, making this weapon, at least in my opinion, now slightly more viable than it previously was. Is it a great weapon? No, still not really, in my opinion. Moving on then to some slightly more general changes for weapons. The Storm variants of any kind of automatic weapon have seen the amount of horizontal recoil that the Storm version reduces over, for example, the factory version decrease. In other words, Storm variants now have more horizontal recoil than previously, still, however, of course, less horizontal recoil than, for example, a factory version of such a weapon. Furthermore, when bipoded with an LMG, things are now slightly different. There is actually no more spread increase. So you're always shooting at your minimum spread, maximum accuracy when bipoded with an LMG. However, the amount of horizontal recoil decrease that bipodding your LMG actually gives you has also substantially been decreased. A decrease of a decrease means, of course, an increase. Thus, effectively, the more long-range LMGs with low recoil are now more effective when being biported, or just as effective as previously. However, the kind of high fire rate, high recoil weapons such as the bar, or more notably of course the Parabellum, are now less easily controlled, less effective when bipoded, and thus will no longer, hopefully, be abused just as much as they previously were. In news of things that nobody actually wanted to see, we've gotten a damage buff to trip mines. That is to say, the high explosive version of the trip mine now does double damage to players who sprint through it. So if you're careless, you don't see the trip mine, you just sprint through it, you're actually going to receive double damage. I believe that should outright kill you at that point. Furthermore, gas strip mines have now seen an additional explosive damage added to them. So they now do 15 damage, 30 if you sprint through them, of course, just like the HE double damage multiplier for people who sprint through them when they're triggered. However, you can no longer put multiple tripwires basically in each other, right next to each other. The same actually applies for mines, anti-vehicle mines that is. And to somewhat compensate for that, those anti-vehicle mines have seen a 50% increase in the damage they do, as well as an increase to their blast radius. In effect, what this ultimately means, I believe, is DICE is changing the role of mines up from a outright vehicle killer to more of a vehicle disabler for the sake of ambushes. Only time will tell if this doesn't actually nerf mines into absolute oblivion, because if you can't get the kill on a vehicle, you actually essentially have to camp around your mines as a assault player if you actually want to end up finishing off that vehicle in most situations, which is not very practical, to put it frank. Overall, there's a number of other fixes that have gone into this game. Only a couple really are notable. We've got a fix for the shotgun audio bug, which is hallelujah. That thing was so annoying, absolutely horrible. We've also got no more elite classes in War Pigeons. I mean, 1.5 years after it was clear that those things needed to go, DICE has found some time to do that, so good on you, DICE. We've got a couple of small improvements for the RSP server managers, admins. Not anything worth going into, however. RSP is still essentially not really worth investing in at this point. We've got a little bit more customization for icons and colors. So if you want to, for example, make every single enemy icon, instead of being red, pink, you can now do that. More creative freedom to the player. Nothing wrong with that. And lastly, if you wish to modify your vehicle, for example, your tank, but you can't actually spawn in one at that point in time, you can still modify it. You can just essentially click on if there was one there, modify it, and then when one comes up, you can go in straight with the presets you've selected. No more annoying, essentially having to weighing up, trying to spam click as fast as you can to get the vehicle, or actually selecting the preset you want, but risking not actually getting the vehicle from now on. So overall, the changes are good. There has been some negative sides to it already. That's quite noticeable. I've seen far less people using medic weapons or using the medic class in general already in a little bit of play testing. I've seen quite a lot more people camping. That's specifically, of course, with bipods. Whether or not this is just short term, or whether this is long term as well, only time will tell. I, for my part, am definitely happy, however, that the time to kill patch is finally here, because for many reasons previously already discussed, this, in my opinion, will and already is massively improving Battlefield 1's infantry combat. That being said, however, I'd like to know your opinion on the patch, as well as if I left anything important out that I should have mentioned. Leave that as well as your usual video suggestions down below in the comments, or hit me up with it on Twitter. If you enjoyed the video, found it helpful, give it a thumbs up. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 video.